It is 3 p.m. in New York, 7 in London, and on 4 on a Thursday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Conn-young. You're watching ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. In her second year in office, President Park Geun-hye has at times used strong words to express her intention to implement major regulatory reforms. And on this Thursday, she is presiding over a 4-hour televised debate on deregulation with government officials and some 60 representatives from the private sector in attendance. Let's go live to our presidential office correspondent Choi You-sun for details on today's debate, which began about 2 hours ago. You-sun.
Conn-young, in her opening remarks, President Park highlighted how sweeping regulatory reforms would be the key to encouraging businesses to innovate and actively invest, ultimately leading to job creation. In her 3-year economic innovation plan, which was laid out during her New Year's address, the president had vowed to streamline red tape and to spur economic growth. Referring to a recent Korean drama that has become a hit in China, she said overseas fans cannot buy the fashion products seen in dramas because they don't have the unique electronic identification certification required for online transactions here in Korea. The president then called for government employees to be more proactive in regulatory reforms, proposing an evaluation system where they would be rewarded for their deregulation initiatives. She also asked for a balance between easing unnecessary regulations and boosting the ones that are required in the areas of welfare, the environment, and private information protection.
Well, You-sun, she obviously is very passionate about making these regulatory reforms. Now, I understand the government also reported to the president a set of deregulation measures.
You're right. The government has pledged to wipe out more than 2,000 economic regulations by 2016, which means bringing down the volume of registered regulations to 80% of the current level. The government also hopes to complete 10% of that reduction by the end of this year. And a regulatory control system adopted from the British model will be implemented next year. It would automatically rid the system of existing regulations upon the introduction of new ones to ensure there's no additional cost to the public and businesses. The debate is ongoing as we speak. President Park is listening to the private sector's concerns and questions, and she and her ministers are exchanging views on deregulation with the participating businesses. Conn-young?
All right, You-sun, thank you for that, and do keep us updated throughout the day. That was our presidential office correspondent Choi You-sun on President Park Geun-hye's push for regulatory reforms and a televised debate on deregulation that is currently taking place at the nation's top office. Meanwhile, Korean doctors have called off a nationwide strike planned for next week. The Korean Medical Association said it will accept a tentative agreement reached with the government on contentious medical policies after a vote held earlier this morning. The KMA said that of the 41,000 members that participated in the balloting, over 62% voted to accept the deal, which includes a plan to carry out a trial run of a controversial telemedicine system and allow hospitals to build for-profit subsidiaries, along with other revisions to medical policy. Now, this planned 6-day strike was to start next Monday and followed a 1-day doctor strike earlier this month. Now, there is rising speculation that the leaders of Korea, the United States, and Japan will meet on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague next week. If the trilateral summit does take place, it will be the first time President Park Geun-hye will meet with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe since taking office. ARIRANG News Foreign Affairs correspondent Hwang Sung-hee reports.
It's looking increasingly likely that President Park Geun-hye will meet with their Japanese counterpart in what will be the first official meeting between the two since she took office last year. The meeting would take place as part of a trilateral summit with the United States on the sidelines of next week's Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague. President Park has thus far refused to sit down with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, criticizing him for his distorted perception of history. But Abe's recent stream of conciliatory gestures has put the ball in President Park's court. Last week, the Japanese leader stated his administration will uphold a landmark apology issued to the victims of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement. Just days later, Abe called South Korea Japan's most important neighboring country and expressed his hope that the two could build a future-oriented relationship at the upcoming meeting in the Netherlands. The Japanese government has also reportedly postponed announcing the results of its annual textbook screening to early April from March 26th. The event usually angers South Korea, which argues Japan is trying to cover up its wartime crimes and making unjustified territorial claims over the Korea-controlled Dokdo Island. Sources in Seoul say that Tokyo's actions may not be enough for a bilateral summit, but that the two could meet in the presence of the U.S. The presidential office of Cheongwade is reportedly reviewing whether to say yes to the trilateral summit next week. If the talks do take place, the three leaders will likely discuss North Korea's nuclear program and regional issues of mutual interest. As willing as the two neighbors may be to patch up their differences, they're also under pressure from Washington, who wants its two main allies in Northeast Asia to mend ties before President Barack Obama visits the region next month. Hwang Sang-hee, ARIRANG News.
Now, moving over to the situation in Crimea, the Ukrainian government is making preparations to evacuate its troops from Crimea after more Ukrainian bases were taken over by Russian forces on Wednesday. Western leaders say they will slap even more sanctions on Moscow if Russian forces encroach further into eastern Ukraine. Our Shin Se-min reports.
The head of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council told reporters in Kiev Wednesday that Ukraine was planning to relocate 25,000 service personnel and families from the region, effectively surrendering the disputed territory. His comments came after pro-Russian forces stormed two naval bases in Crimea on Wednesday night and raised a Russian flag. These were just the latest in a series of takeovers by Russian troops and local self-defense forces using a mixture of attrition and threats. The attacks on the bases in Crimea came as the United States and Europe sought ways to increase pressure on defiant Russia. Speaking from the former Soviet Republic of Lithuania Wednesday, U.S. Vice President Joe Biden declared that the U.S. was absolutely committed to defending its allies.
I want to make it clear. We stand resolutely with our Baltic allies in support of the Ukrainian people and against Russian aggression. As long as Russia continues on this dark path, they will face increasing political and economic isolation.
The Obama administration and its allies said Wednesday that they're working to devise new and tougher economic penalties to stop Russian President Vladimir Putin from moving forces further into Ukraine's eastern territory. UN Secretary General Pan Ki-moon will also meet Putin in Moscow on Thursday to seek a way out of the conflict. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
And what could be a turn in the Malaysian Airlines story, Australian Prime Minister says it has credible information has come from the missing Malaysian Airlines plane nearly 2 weeks after it disappeared. Prime Minister Tony Abbott told Parliament Thursday that two objects that could be related to the missing plane have been spotted on satellite imagery, adding that he has informed Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak. He added that an Australian Air Force aircraft was dispatched to the area to try to locate the objects, with 3 more surveillance planes to follow. He has not disclosed the exact location of the objects to the press and has cautioned against drawing any premature conclusions about the development. New U.S. Federal Reserve Chief Janet Yellen has kept policies set by her predecessor Ben Bernanke on track by slashing another $10 billion from the Fed's monthly bond buying program. Now, she also hinted at a rate increase, which could come as soon as spring of next year. ARIRANG's Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
U.S. Federal Reserve officials have made another $10 billion reduction in their bond buying stimulus program as widely expected. After her first monetary policy meeting as Fed Chair, Janet Yellens said Wednesday that the economy is strong enough to support continued improvement in the labor market. The program was at $85 billion a month in December, and the fresh cut will take it to $55 billion. While Yellen said that the central bank expects to keep interest rates near zero for a considerable time after the bond buying program ends this fall, she hinted that it could start raising rates next spring.
The language that we use in this statement is considerable period. So this is the kind of term it's hard to define, but probably means something on the order of around 6 months or that type of thing.
The Fed tried, however, to set the market at ease, saying it would look at a wide range of economic indicators to make a judgment on the economy's readiness for higher rates. It also said that it would no longer link its future decision to increase rates to the unemployment rate, as the jobless rate has fallen faster than expected. Despite the assurance, financial markets reacted swiftly to her comments, with U.S. stocks and government bonds falling. Market analysts say that the Fed's fresh forecasts show a shift to a more hawkish policy stance than what they had been seeing just a few months ago. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Let's now get more insight on how Wall Street responded to this rather surprising comments from U.S. Fed Chair Janet Yellen's press conference. We have Angela Moon, senior correspondent at Thomson Reuters in New York, connecting with us live to give us an exclusive look on how Wall Street took the news. Angela, you must have firsthand experience, if you will, on market reaction to the presser from Janet Yellen. We know the market sold off on this initially, but tell us in detail how the atmosphere was, how the traders and investors took the news.
Well, good afternoon there, Conn-young. I have to say today's presser was one of the most unexpected events from the U.S. Federal Reserve. The statement from the central bank's latest policy meeting was in line with market expectations. However, the real surprise came from Janet Yellen's presser, which was aired about half an hour after the release of the statement. Yellen said the central bank could start to raise interest rates around 6 months after its current asset purchase program ends. She said the bond purchases would probably end in the fall, which means a rate reduction 6 months later would move up the timetable for the Fed's first rate hike, which many market participants had been expecting in the second half of 2015.
Now, Angela, that does seem like something that would take the market by a bit of a surprise. What are analysts saying on the floor there?
Well, several analysts are wondering whether her answer was an unintended slip, given the deliberately vague language of the Fed's statement. But whether it is or it isn't, the reaction in financial markets was swift and sharp as prices for U.S. stocks and government bonds added to earlier losses triggered by fresh Fed forecasts that showed policymakers are inclined to raise rates a bit more aggressively than they had been just a few months ago. Most of the top Wall Street economists, however, continue to see the first rate hike in the second half of 2016. This is according to a Reuters poll. So it's definitely a mixed, sort of divided picture here.
Now, Angela, going back a step a little bit, I realize this was Janet Yellen's first press briefing as the chair of the Federal Reserve, and I think she more or less showed that the Fed under her would be a little bit different from how it was run by Ben Bernanke. Now, how is it being evaluated by the investors there?
You're absolutely right. This marks the first press conference for Janet Yellen, who is also the first female chair of the Federal Reserve. The Fed holds these press conferences regularly to let the public know how the nation's central bank is delivering on its two major tasks, which are, number one, lowering the unemployment rate so that nearly all Americans have jobs, and number two, controlling inflation to make sure you're basically not paying too much at the supermarket. It was historic enough to see a woman deliver the official diagnosis on the U.S. economy. Yet Yellen's first policy statement was historic for another major reason, which is that she showed that she's running a very different kind of Federal Reserve than the one Ben Bernanke ran before. Unlike Bernanke, who often catered to Wall Street's fears, this new Federal Reserve appears to be reluctant to play the usual game. It was clear that under her rules, the Fed is stepping away from its reputation as a bunch of economists eager to please traders on trading floors. The best example came when Yellen wiped away one lazy way of measuring the economy's health. The Fed, under Bernanke, promised that when the unemployment rate hits 6.5%, the central bank would raise interest rates. This was called quantitative guidance, and the Fed, Wall Street's fetish for largely made-up numbers. But Yellen basically shut down the argument today, saying that the Fed will take into account a wide range of information, including measures of the labor market conditions, indicators of inflation pressures, and inflation expectations, and readings on financial developments, giving a new definition to what qualifies as, quote, quantitative guidance.
So basically no more slacking off under Janet Yellen. All right, Angela Moon, senior Wall Street correspondent at Thomson Reuters, New York. Thank you, Angela, for joining us to deliver us the very latest on Wall Street. Now back here in this country, Korea's 3 mobile carriers have vowed to stop providing customers with illegal subsidies. At a joint press conference Thursday, SK Telecom, KT, and LG U+ said they will shift their sales and marketing paradigm from one oriented around illegal subsidies to one that's service-oriented. To do that, they will work with the country's handset makers, including Samsung and LG Electronics, to lower the factory prices of cell phones so that retailers will not feel the need to give subsidies to their customers. Now, in addition, they plan to launch a market monitoring team run by the 3 firms and suspend retailers that violate regulations. The announcement comes after the 3 carriers were hit with tens of millions of dollars in fines on top of a minimum 45-day business suspension for providing those subsidies. Now, on a very different note, the popularity of the Korean language is spreading around the globe as part of a government plan to promote it. And now tens of thousands of students overseas are selecting Korean as their second language. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The Ministry of Education has been taking the initiative to spread the Korean language around the globe, and it launched a 5-year plan to promote it in 2011. The goal was to enhance Korea's global status. For the Korean government, it was also a chance to find overseas talent. As a result, tens of thousands of elementary to middle school students in 24 countries are choosing Korean as their second language. What triggered the boom?
The Korean wave played a big part in the fact Korea became well off. Students watch Korean dramas and listen to K-pop, and they want to speak Korean. The point is, Korea's dynamic culture has influenced young people abroad.
By the end of 2011, there were a total of 695 Korean language classes in elementary and middle schools in 22 countries. By the end of 2013, that number jumped to 882 classes in 24 countries. In Asia alone, over 41,000 students and 476 schools were offering Korean in their curriculum. Classes were open in England, Bulgaria, and other countries for the first time in late 2013. So is the booming interest in the Korean language here to stay?
As we provide the Korean language, we need to make an effort to learn their culture, and the Korean wave will continue to be successful, and more foreigners will show their love and appreciation for it.
The Ministry of Education says it is working to expand the Korean language program to 1,000 classes in 28 countries by the end of this year. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
없습니다. 지난 2월 25일 국제개혁의 아이디어와 성과가 많은지 당부의 말씀을 걸쳐
Now, the Korean government is pushing a major shift in the national wage system, including the replacement of single-step systems at individual workplaces with pay based on duties, functions, and performance. Now, Seoul's Labor Ministry unveiled a new set of guidelines called Wage System Reorganization Manual on Wednesday, and that is a topic of our discussion with Dr. Kim Byungju, the head of KLMP Consulting, and of course our regular commentator on this program. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
Now, so you saw the new set of guidelines yesterday, announced yesterday. What are the key points that we find in this new set of measures?
Several key points following the Supreme Court decision that came out recently, and actually the Supreme Court decision itself is, at that time it looked like it was taking the side with the labor, expanding the overall base wage structure here. And we have on the screen the visuals that explain the key points of this government guideline that comes after this Supreme Court decision. Actually, the first point, simplifying wage structure itself, was the main point of the court decision, meaning that overall base wage boundary of it will need to be expanded, and also by doing so reducing the sum of the subcomponents. But number 2 and number 3 that you see on the screen, those are the things, those are the changes that government believes are necessary in order to make this possible overall. So those 2 items, number 2 and 3, are the important points that are being introduced by this government guideline here. Basically, the point of number 2 is overall, as you mentioned, the reducing the seniority portion, meaning that if you spend longer years at a company, in the current system you get to pay more, but there the new change would be that kind of annual accumulation will be reduced, and in that place, as you mentioned, duty and function and capability driven wage system will be introduced further. And lastly, the third point, increasing performance pay. The performance pay side overall will be increased in response to the reduced part of the seniority pay, which is number 2. So those 3 points are the main points of this change that's coming in.
Right, so reducing the seniority portion, and performance-based wage system.
Right.
Now, the first point, let me get back to simplifying the wage structure. How is the government going to carry this one?
Right. Now, this is a very complicated one, so we need a visual on the screen once again to find out exactly what kind of changes are taking place. Even the visual that we have on the screen itself looks quite complicated. But the basic idea is, overall, pay attention to number 2 box on the right-hand side, the base wage. You can see from the traditional base wage, which is B on the left-hand side, will be included. But plus, on top of that, B plus C plus D2, meaning that other elements from the current system will be added and considered as a part of base wage altogether. This is the court ruling, result of court ruling. But the rest of them, the incentive pay will have different ingredients or components that will be, restructured from the current system right there. And then there will be additional pay. So from about 5 different categories that we have, which makes the current the wage system very complicated, the new system will have about 3 different large groups that have different components.
I think, it looks complicated, but when you really try to understand it, it's not that complicated anymore.
Right.
Now, this wage peak system, now how will that be introduced into this new set of measures?
That's another interesting question, and we have another visual ready to explain that, the answer to that question. That is, the top one is what we have in place right now. It has been causing a lot of problems and headache these days because as people sit there in the same company longer, their salary would go up continuously. And in that first box, if you introduce the wage peak system, it will have to be decreased at a certain point. And that is the idea. And to actually implement the idea, the government proposed those 3 boxes at the bottom. New mixed system. By the way, these 3 boxes, lower 3 boxes, they are supposed to show curve declining a little bit, but sometimes the cases will vary. But by the way, anyway, the new mixed system is mostly for the manufacturing jobs, blue-collar workers, where your wage over time throughout your career will increase based on your skill levels as well as your position and duty and all that. And more diversified system, the third box will be applied to the white collars. And there will be different tracks, they're saying, and it should have a certain peak or a kind of like plateauing point after a certain age. And the new step-up system is the one that should be applied to the professional jobs, such as nurses and other kinds of professions and professionals, and it has complicated details as well.
Now, the labor side is not happy with this. The labor side never seems to be happy with what the government comes up with.
Right.
Why are they unhappy?
Basically, when the Supreme Court decision came out, the general expectation was because the base wage will be expanded, we will get to pay more in terms of our salary. But we always want more pay with the same amount of work or even less amount. So that was the expectation. But according to this kind of new changes proposed by the government, that's not going to be necessarily the case. That's why labor side is not very happy about it, especially those curves going down. And they're saying that kind of actually make people unwilling to stay around until their retirement age, even though retirement age may be guaranteed. In terms of, especially in Korean psychology, you know, older people getting paid less than the younger ones, that's a big discouragement, they say. So that system may not work, they're saying. So the labor side is arguing that we should maintain a system where the wage will continue to go up. But I think that needs to be all negotiated and company by company negotiations.
Right, and it will take some time.
Yeah.
All right, Dr. Kim Byungju, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
And on that note, we'll have to end this newscast. That's all from me at this hour. Thank you for watching. I'll see you back here in less than 2 hours' time on Early Edition at 6.